Hello everyone, in this video we'll discuss some of the most brutal bouts in mixed martial arts history. Now let's get started. We've all witnessed a great deal of exciting, dull, or mediocre fights. However, what actually defines a great fight? Does this have to do with the fighter's rivalry? Is that what's at stake? Or is it just a matter of witnessing someone get smacked around? It's a fact that nothing is more satisfying than witnessing a spectacular knockout, or a well-fought bout that ends with both fighters screaming at one another. Please leave a comment below describing what you believe to be the bloodiest fight in history. Our first fight, Dennis Stoidnik versus Stefan Struve. A 5'11" inches guy is engaged in combat with a 7'9" inches person. Does that not look a little strange to me? In any case, UFC 99 was scheduled to feature this fight. Even though they weren't the evening's main attraction, their performance managed to generate some excitement. Essentially, this battle begins with some stand-up, trading blows, but Struve's main goal was to take Stoidnik to the ground and submit him. The amusing thing is that Struve and Dennis are nearly the same height, even when Struve is on his knees. After Struve's unsuccessful attempt at a triangle choke, Stoidnik got back up on his feet. The blood spurted because of this. Because Struve would not get off the ground, Stoidnik simply jumped on top of him and delivered some of the most vicious hammer fists anyone has ever seen. Dennis clearly doesn't need to go to Home Depot to get a hammer based on the demonstration of his hammer fists during this fight. Essentially, the bout concluded with Struve landing on top of Stoidnik and applying a solid chokehold until Stoidnik was forced to tap. After seeing Struve, I felt as though I needed stitches. Okay. Now let's move on to the next, Joe Lauzon versus Jim Miller. There are those who contend that this fight was the bloodiest ever. In UFC 155, Joe Lauzon squared off against Jim Miller. Not only was the fight graphically bloody, but it was also amazing to witness the skill and heart these two fighters displayed. Jim appeared to be able to perform an arm triangle while standing during the first minute and a half of the round, but Joe managed to escape. A few breaks were made in the fight to tend to Joe's deep cut or to remove the loose bandage that was encircling Joe's wrist. Given that Joe had nearly put an end to the fight by subduing Jim, it could have gone either way. Joe managed to land a heel hook, but the last round was over, so he was unable to complete. By the time the fight was over, both fighters were covered in blood. This bout ranks among the top 5 of the UFC's bloodiest bounces, and it was amazing. Joe Rogan is even able to hear it.
What a fight! That was a tremendous fight. Just the barrage of strikes.
Alright, let's move on to the next one. Jonathan Goulet against Jay Heron. This fight ranks among the bloodiest fights ever captured on camera. According to Stitch Duran, this is the bloodiest fight and cut he has ever had to deal with. In 2005, Jay Heron and Jonathan Goulet squared off at UFC Fight Night 2. The blood had appeared during the second round after Jonathan had thrown a superb knee that instantly caused Jay's forehead to burst with blood. Jay had gotten off to a great start in the fight, but the blood made it very hard for him to focus on what was in front of him. The two fought until the third round, when Kool-Aid successfully scored a knee, resulting in more blood loss for Jay, and Jonathan was able to stop the fight. Jay deserves praise for persevering for as long as he did though. What a shame that the fight ended so quickly. It was an amazing fight. Now let's move on to the next, Stevenson versus Penn. Given how much blood Joe Stevenson lost in this fight, it is really one of the hardest to watch. The reason for scheduling the fight was Sean Shirk, the current lightweight champion, being placed on probation by the California State Athletic Commission after he tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs, or PEDs, during his match against UFC 73. In any case, this essentially helped Stevenson secure a title defense against Penn at the exact moment when Herb Dean signaled for the fighters to go in. The moment their gloves touched, BJ Penn dropped Joe in the opening 4 seconds of the first round with a stunning uppercut. As a result, the majority of the fight was entirely controlled by the ground game, but evidently BJ didn't find this problematic. Stevenson literally looked like a man who had just been mugged at the end of the first round. All of this is due to BJ Penn hitting Stevenson in the forehead with horrifying elbows, make his blood spurt out like a fire hydrant. The excerpt. It's surprising that Stevenson hung in there and tried to fight out of this mission, but once BJ Penn had Stevenson on his back, everyone knew it was over. The men did their best to close the gash on his forehead as best they could, but after a few exchanges in the beginning of the round, the cut opened up again and blooded out even worse, leaving both fighters completely covered in blood. BJ performed his trademark face-smacking and glove-licking celebration after the fight. After this one, you can't help but feel awful for Joe, regardless of what anybody else thinks. To be honest, Stevenson deserves a lot of credit for persevering through the whole thing, and BJ Penn gave a very amazing performance. Alright, let's move on to the next one. John Doe versus Antonio Silva. This is also a really good battle. Silva and Hunt would square off at UFC Fight Night 33. There are many who claim that this was the greatest heavyweight match ever. It was ridiculous how much respect these two combatants had for one another. With a few jabs, the fight got off to a somewhat sluggish start, until Silva's right hook caught Hunt in the stomach. Hunt was eventually able to stand up and carry on with his combat. Mark's bleached hair was slowly turning red and there was already some blood showing through. Hunt and Silva were both able to deliver a number of punches, but Antonio seemed to take the hits worse since he started bleeding more than Hunt did. The bout eventually came to a finish with a draw. However, there are other opinions that contend that Mark got the better of the fight and that it wasn't even close to a tie. What were your thoughts on the result? After testing positive for steroid usage, Silva was later dismissed. After Silva was eventually allowed back into the UFC, their second fight against Mark was different from the first. In the opening round of the bout, Mark had beaten Silva in the first round of the fight. In any case, let's keep going. Alright, so this one is a fan favorite among UFC fans. Robbie was scheduled to battle Rory McDonald for the UFC 189 title, and the two were scheduled to square off. When the two of them previously faced off, Robbie prevailed via split decision, but Rory was ready for another shot. The audience began to jeer as the match got off to a poor start since neither boxer was exchanging many blows. The audience had no idea how drastically this battle would ultimately turn out. The two boxers had only begun to throw hands when the rounds intensified much more. Rory will eventually sustain cuts to his nose and under his eye. The fans believed that this was where it would finish, but Rory was able to counterattack Lawler, giving the impression that Robbie was about to go down. This was one of the craziest times, to be honest. Robbie spat up a mouthful of blood at the end of round 4, leaving both competitors drenched in blood and looking at one another. This truly was the VMF fight of a lifetime. When Rory was hit by Robbie's punch, the battle finally concluded, as Rory was knocked out via TKO. Rory seems to have given up, but how much is too much? It was revealed after the fight that Rory actually had his nose broken by Robbie. Let's move on to the next one. Antonio Silva versus Cain Velasquez. This subsequent one is also among the most discussed. This battle is among the deadliest fights of all time, especially the one between Bigfoot Silva and Cain Velasquez. These two individuals are really oddities of nature because of their size, not simply their height and genuine bulk. Silva is around 6'4", whereas Cain Velasquez is barely 6'1". Antonio Silva, also known as Bigfoot Silva, was scheduled to face up against former UFC heavyweight champion Cain Velasquez to retain his championship. They were UFC 160's primary attraction for the evening. Antonio chose to launch a sweeping leg kick at the beginning of the bout, which knocked Cain to the ground. However, he managed to cling on Antonio's leg as he plummeted, bringing him down with him. At this moment, there was no competition. Antonio began to pour out till he lost vision as Cain continued to beat Bigfoot with hammer fists and elbows. Come on, man, take a look at him. His face is still redder than his shorts. The struggle had to end right away, so the Cub man could tend to Antonio. They resumed where they left off as soon as the combat went on. After taking Antonio to the ground right away, Cain put a stop to the battle 2 minutes later. It was essentially a bloodbath. Cain was constantly sulking at Antonio as he was on top of him. Although it was difficult to watch, the battle was fantastic. Let's move on to the next one. Shark Sean against Kenny Florian. This fight is also regarded as one of the deadliest ones available. In UFC 64, Kenny Florian was scheduled to face Shark Sean. Shark's trainers were anxious about this battle since he had injured his shoulder a week before he faced Kenny. Shark managed to persevere and continued the battle. Shark had won all but one of the rounds before the fight started. Although Shark had dominated the previous rounds, Kenny had executed several very nice ground elbows. Shark sustained a rather severe cut above his forehead as a result of this. Remarkably, the referee had never broken up the fight. Throughout the battle, Kenny repeatedly defended himself from the ground game by sticking his toes in the fence. Even though Kenny was about to be thrown by Sean, who had managed to lift him up, Kenny briefly held onto the fence to block Sean, prompting the referee to step in. This was a really major mistake because just seconds after Kenny attempted to grasp the fence, Sean was able to fling him like a ragdoll and land some more blows. When the fight was ended, a unanimous vote pronounced Sean the winner. After defeating Kenny, Sean Sherk was given the champion's belt. Clearly a great deal of blood was shed throughout this battle. Alright MMA fans, thank you so much for sticking around to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, make sure to hit that notification bell, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new. Also comment below what video you want to see next. Which fight did you think was the bloodiest of all time? Leave it in the comments below.